She walked into Vespre on King Street with $85 in a white envelope holding her daughter's hand. The girl was 7. Her dress was stitched from 2 old ones the night before. Shanice ignored the chandelier. She did not pause at the gold menu or hesitate at the door. She walked straight to the podium and asked for a table for 2 for her daughter's birthday. The hostess looked at her, then at the child, and finally down at their shoes. It was that specific look, the kind that decides everything about a person before they even finish their opening sentence. They gave her table 14, a corner seat shoved right next to the kitchen door. Every time it swung open, the clatter of pans and running water and shouted orders shoved into the dining room like an unwanted guest. It was the exact table you give someone when you decide they do not deserve the full experience. Shanice knew it. She had worked enough jobs in enough rooms to understand when a seat was just a seat and when it was a message. She said nothing. She simply pulled out the chair for Zuri, sat down across from her, and opened the menu. The dining room at Vespre held 17 tables. White linen on every single one. The silverware had real weight to it, the kind that feels entirely different from the forks back home, a quiet warning that whatever comes next will cost more than you planned. The lighting hung low and warm. It poured from fixtures mounted along the exposed brick walls, carefully angled so every plate seemed to glow from the inside out. Dark green velvet covered the chairs. The original hardwood floor had been refinished to a high gloss, perfectly reflecting the candlelight from every table. Zuri sat up perfectly straight. She rested both hands neatly in her lap. Reaching for the cloth napkin folded into a neat fan beside her plate, she unfolded it with absolute care. She laid it across her knees exactly how her mother had taught her. They had practiced this at home 3 nights that week. Paper towels and plastic plates spread across the kitchen table in their North Charleston apartment, Shanice guiding her on which fork goes where, how to drape the napkin, and saying thank you when the waiter brings water. Zuri practiced until she nailed it every single time. She was 7 years old, sitting in that heavy velvet chair like she had been dining there her entire life. Then Shanice finally opened the menu. Appetizers started at $22. Entrees ranged from $38 to $61. She had exactly $85 in the envelope in her bag. She had run the math at home twice, once on paper, once in her head on the long bus ride over. 1 appetizer, the roasted beet salad, $22 split between them. 1 entree for Zuri, the grilled chicken, $38. 1 glass of tap water. Tax would bring it to roughly $67. A 15% tip meant another $10. Total, $77. She would have $8 left over. She was definitely not ordering anything for herself. When Zuri asked, she would just tell her she had eaten before they left the house. In reality, she had not eaten since a slice of toast at 6 that morning before her shift at Benny's. The waiter approached, a young guy in his early 20s. He set down 2 glasses of water. At the table to their left, he placed the glass down with both hands and a polite nod. But when he reached Shanice, he slammed the glass down with 1 hand, never even breaking his stride. Exactly how you toss something onto a counter while walking past it. No eye contact, no greeting. He just moved on. Zuri missed it entirely. She was too busy taking in the room, eyes wide and lips parted. The pure look of a child stepping into a world she had only dreamed about. She stared at the candles, stared at the high ceiling. She watched a woman 3 tables away wearing a necklace that caught the firelight every time she shifted her head. Zuri whispered that this was the most beautiful place she had ever seen. Shanice just looked at her little girl. There she was perched in a green velvet chair in a stitched-together dress, napkin resting perfectly on her lap, hands folded exactly right. And she was glowing. Not from the expensive lighting, but from something deeper. From the simple magic of being 7 years old, sitting across from her mother in a room that felt entirely out of this world. Shanice looked at her, and suddenly, $85, 2 months of skipped lunches and walking instead of taking the bus, felt worth every single penny, worth every exhausted step. She reached across the white linen and gently tucked a loose braid behind Zuri's ear. She softly wished her baby a happy birthday. From the far end of the bar, Victoria Langford was watching them. She had been the general manager of Vespre for 4 years. Late 30s, sharp black blazer, hair pulled back agonizingly tight. She had the kind of rigid posture that makes a person look much taller, an incredibly useful trait when your job demands controlling a dining room without ever raising your voice. She had clocked Shanice and Zuri the very second they walked in. She watched the hostess seat them at table 14 and stayed quiet, mainly because 14 was exactly where she would have hidden them herself. Now she observed from the bar, holding a glass of sparkling water, wearing the flat expression of someone finalizing a harsh assessment they had already made. She studied Shanice's shoes. Canvas flats, the kind you grab at Family Dollar for $9 because reliable ones cost $35. And $35 is not something you waste on yourself when your kid needs new socks, the electric bill jumped $11, and you are saving up for a birthday dinner that matters far more than your own tired feet. Victoria weighed the shoes, then the worn bag, then finally the menu, trembling slightly in Shanice's hands. She set her sparkling water down on the polished bar. Smoothing her black blazer with one hand, she started walking directly toward table 14. She arrived armed with a smile. It was the technically correct smile, the one drilled into you during high-end hospitality training. Wide enough to fake warmth, tightly controlled enough to hold authority. It had the perfect shape, but zero heat behind it. She greeted them, asking if they were enjoying their visit so far. Shanice glanced up and politely thanked her, adding that they were finally ready to order. Victoria held her ground. She called that wonderful but smoothly added that she just wanted to ensure they were entirely comfortable with the menu. She noted that some guests find the pricing a bit unexpected, and they certainly would not want any discomfort when the check arrived. That heavy sentence just hung in the dead air between them. It was not a question nor a warning. It was a calculated measurement. Victoria was testing to see if Shanice would flinch. But Shanice never flinched. She had been measured like this 1,000 times before, in waiting rooms, in cold office lobbies, in every boutique where a woman in cheap canvas shoes walks in, and some clerk decides in 3 flat seconds if she is a paying customer or a security problem. She had been sized up so often she barely even felt the tape measure anymore. She only saw the cold person holding it. Calmly, she replied that she knew the prices and had read the menu thoroughly. She requested the roasted beet salad and the grilled chicken, please. Victoria kept her stiff smile locked in place. She smoothly agreed, of course, absolutely. She pivoted to walk away. Then she stopped. Leaning toward the young waiter at the service station, she spoke in a very specific register. Not a whisper, but not full volume either. The exact tone of someone who wants to be overheard by the right crowd, but ignored by the wrong one. She instructed him to settle the check before bringing out the main course. The waiter gave a short nod. He refused to look at Shanice, but Shanice heard absolutely every single word. She was completely meant to. That was the entire point. At the table to their right, a wealthy couple in their 50s, the woman in a cream-colored wrap, the man in a sharp sport coat, both turned their heads slightly. The woman muttered something quiet to her husband. Hiding behind her wine glass, the man threw a fast glance at Shanice before quickly looking away. Then they both smiled. A tiny, fleeting smirk, the kind that is not really a smile, but a harsh verdict passed between two people convinced they are being terribly discreet. Zuri caught the sound, though not the words. After all, she was only 7. She had no idea what was actually said or why the neighboring table was staring, but she definitely heard that muffled laughter. She felt the brutal shift in the room. Kids sense those things, not through logic, but right through their skin. They feel the sudden drop in temperature when the air around their mother goes entirely rigid. She quietly looked down at her empty plate. She stayed completely silent. The appetizer showed up 25 minutes late. Shanice had literally watched 2 tables seated long after them get served first. When she politely asked their waiter if there was some sort of delay, he muttered that the kitchen was just backed up tonight, and it would not be much longer. He delivered the excuse without ever meeting her eyes. He tossed the words over his shoulder while walking away. Finally, the roasted beet salad appeared. Shanice divided it onto 2 smaller plates, sliding the larger portion over to Zuri. The little girl ate cautiously, exactly the way they had rehearsed back home. Fork strictly in the left hand, knife in the right. Tiny bites. The heavy cloth napkin dabbed at the corner of her mouth after every 3rd bite. She was trying so incredibly hard, trying desperately to do everything right inside a room that had long ago decided she simply did not belong. Then Victoria returned. This time she did not even bother faking a smile first. She planted herself beside table 14 with the rigid stance of someone entirely done pretending to be polite. She coldly apologized for the interruption, but claimed several regular guests had expressed concern over the dining atmosphere. She announced, voice flat, that this might not be the most suitable setting for her family this evening. She suggested they try again another time. She delivered it with the crisp diction of someone who had rehearsed kicking people out before pleasantly, highly professionally. It sounded exactly like a door quietly clicking shut while the host pretends it was never even open. Shanice calmly put down her heavy silver fork. She looked dead up at Victoria. She held her gaze steady. She refused to glance at the other tables or the ceiling or the exit. She had stood in rooms just like this one before. She had stood in front of people who looked right at her and saw exactly what they expected to see and nothing more. She learned a long time ago that the look in their eyes said everything about who they were and absolutely nothing about her. She kept her voice even. She did not demand a manager. She just sat there, still and steady. It was the posture of someone who has done nothing wrong, knows it in their bones, and flat out refuses to perform guilt just to make somebody else comfortable. Victoria waited. The silence between them stretched out. Victoria offered to comp the appetizer for the trouble, but said she needed them to leave, citing a policy to protect the experience of all their guests. Shanice stood up slowly. She reached into her bag and pulled out the white envelope. She placed it flat on the table right in front of Victoria. She told her every single dollar in that envelope was real. She came tonight because her daughter turned 7 today, and she had promised her a dinner at a real restaurant. That was all she came for. Victoria stared at the paper. She refused to touch it. She replied that she did not doubt it, but tonight this was not the right place for them. 9 words delivered without any heat or cruelty, but every person within earshot understood exactly what those 9 words carried inside them. Every single one. Shanice picked up the envelope and tucked it back in her bag. She held out her hand and Zuri took it. They stood together beside table 14, the birthday table. The table by the kitchen door with the leftover beet salad and the cloth napkin Zuri had placed perfectly across her lap, just like her mother had taught her. Zuri looked up at her mother's face. She asked if they had done something wrong. The room changed. Not the lighting, not the music, no physical thing at all, but the air itself shifted. It happens when a child says something so simple and so incredibly true that every adult in the room is suddenly forced to hear it, whether they want to or not. The waiter by the service station stopped moving. The couple at the adjacent table fell completely quiet. Victoria's jaw tightened by a fraction of an inch, a shift so small that only someone paying very close attention would have caught it. Shanice refused to answer from above. She knelt down. Right there on the hardwood floor of the Vespre, against the velvet chairs and linen tablecloths and low golden light. She lowered herself until she was eye level with her daughter. She took both of Zuri's hands in hers and told her no baby they did not do anything wrong. Not one single thing. She stood up holding Zuri's hand and walked straight toward the door. She never looked back. Her spine remained straight, her shoulders perfectly level. She was not putting on a show of strength. She was not trying to make a statement. She was just leaving a room that had decided she did not belong. She had walked out of rooms like this before, holding her daughter's hand, with nothing broken inside her that was not already entirely used to being broken. Over at table 7 near the window facing King Street, a woman sat all alone. Geneva Hart, 67 years old, her silver hair pulled into a low knot, a dark green shawl draped over one shoulder. She was eating alone, just like she always did on Tuesday evenings at the Vespre. It was a habit she kept up for nearly 3 years, ever since she stopped cooking at home. Making food for one person, after a lifetime of cooking for hundreds, had become a heavy sort of silence she did not care to sit with. She watched the entire thing unfold from the moment Shanice and Zuri sat down at 14. From the water glass set down with one hand to Victoria's very first visit to their table, from the harsh laughter next to them to the appetizer arriving late. Every single thing that happened in this dining room over the last 40 minutes. Geneva had not stood up. She did not intervene, and she never said a word. But she did put her fork down the second Victoria asked Shanice to leave, and she had not picked it up since. Her plate was still half full. She was not going to finish it. She simply watched Shanice walk to the door. She did not watch her back. She watched her hands. The exact way her fingers gripped the child's hand. Firm, steady. The grip of a person who has been holding everything together for a very long time and completely stopped counting the cost. She watched those shoulders, straight but not stiff, not braced for impact, just straight. It was the posture of a woman who had carried weights so long her body simply learned to stand under it without negotiating. Geneva recognized that feeling. She had carried it herself. 40 years ago in a kitchen on John's Island, with flour covering her hands, a restaurant no bank would ever fund, and a daughter she was raising all alone. She knew it the way you recognize a sound you have not heard in decades, but somehow never forgot. She laid her napkin on the table. She did not bother calling for the check. She just sat there watching the heavy door close behind Shanice and Zuri. Something behind Geneva's eyes shifted. Not pity. Something much sharper than pity, something much closer to recognition. The kind that never asks permission before it changes what you do next. The two of them walked 3 blocks south on King Street. The restaurants slowly thinned out and the storefronts got much smaller. The lighting shifted from the warm, golden glow of places charging $38 for chicken, down to the flat white of convenience stores and the blue flicker of a laundromat still open at 9:15 on a Tuesday. There was a taco truck parked on Meeting Street near the corner of Calhoun. Shanice had passed it 100 times on her way to her second job. She never stopped before. $3.50 for a taco was not money she spent on herself, especially when rice and beans at home cost less than $1 a serving. But she stopped tonight. She ordered 2 tacos, one for Zuri and one for herself, because Zuri would ask why she was not eating, and Shanice refused to lie to her child twice in one night. $7. She handed the man a 5 and 2 ones from the envelope in her bag. She blocked out what $7 meant for the rest of the month, because tonight she just was not going to do that math. They sat down on a bench together. Zuri ate her food carefully, holding it with both hands the way small children hold things they desperately do not want to drop. She never mentioned the restaurant. She did not ask about the manager in the black blazer, the people who laughed, or why they had to leave. She just ate her taco, swinging her little feet because the bench was too tall for them to reach the pavement. She stared out at the street and told her mother the taco was really good. Shanice looked down at her daughter and quietly agreed that it was. Shanice Odom was 29 years old. She had been a prep cook at Benny's Diner on Upper King Street for 3 years, 6 days a week. 6 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon for $11.50 an hour. She cleaned offices for a company called Brighter Spaces from 4 in the afternoon to 8 in the evening. 4 days a week, $13 an hour. She woke up every single morning at 5:15. She got back home every night at 8:45. Somewhere in between all that, she packed Zuri's lunch and dropped her at the Rivers Avenue bus stop at 7:10. She grabbed milk when it went on sale at the Piggly Wiggly for $3.29 because the regular price was $4.18, and $4.18 was the exact difference between making the electric bill and sitting in the dark. Zuri's father was named Deshawn. He took off when Zuri was barely 11 months old. There was no massive fight, no single event, no dramatic collapse. One day he was just there, and the next day he was gone. It was the kind of leaving where, looking back, you suddenly realized the person had been walking away for a very long time before the door ever actually closed. Shanice never talked about him. Not because it hurt, but because there was quite literally nothing useful left to say. A man who walks out on a woman and an 11-month-old baby and in 6 years never sends $1 a letter or even asks how his daughter is doing. He doesn't earn space in your head. She paid $840 a month in rent for a 1-bedroom apartment over in North Charleston on Dorchester Road. Zuri slept in the bedroom. Shanice took the couch. It had a busted spring on the left side, so she covered it with a folded towel to stop the wire from pressing into her back all night. She had been meaning to replace that couch for 2 years. 2 years is a long time to mean to do something, especially when every paycheck drains straight into rent, groceries, electricity, bus fare, and the $40 she paid Miss Thelma. She was the 71-year-old woman across the hall who watched Zuri every afternoon from 3:30 until 8:45. Miss Thelma only ever accepted 20 of those $40. She quietly slipped the other 20 right back into Zuri's jacket pocket, always bundled with a piece of butterscotch candy and a little note that said something like, "For ice cream," or "Hide this from your mama." Zuri always showed Shanice the note anyway. Shanice always pretended to be completely shocked. The $85 sitting in that envelope had taken her 2 entire months to save. She started in the middle of March. She skipped lunch at work every single day. She walked to Benny's instead of taking the bus $2 each way. 5 days a week, $10 saved. She stopped buying the $1 coffee from the gas station on the corner of Dorchester and Reynolds. It was a habit she kept for 3 years, just one small treat for herself before the grind started, but she gave that up too. Every single week, she tucked $8 to $12 into a white envelope, hiding it in the kitchen drawer behind a box of aluminum foil, where Zuri would never find it. 8 weeks, 63 $1 bills, 2 5s, a 10, and a little collection of quarters she had been dropping in there since April. They took the number 10 bus heading back home. Zuri was sound asleep on her shoulder before they even hit the second stop. Shanice sat there, her daughter's head heavy against her arm, and watched the window. The city drifted past in fragments, bright restaurant district lights fading into the dull yellow of street lamps, storefronts vanishing into houses. The houses cramped together, the sidewalks shrank. She watched it all fade the way she did every single night. The same route. The exact same slow shift from the Charleston the tourists photograph to the Charleston that keeps the engine running. She carried Zuri up the stairs to the second-floor apartment 4. Working the deadbolt one-handed, she balanced Zuri against her shoulder. She laid her daughter down and pulled the sheet up. The plastic moon nightlight clicked on, the one Zuri picked out at the dollar store 2 years ago and absolutely needed for sleep. Then came the walk to the kitchen. She sat at the table and dug into her bag, pulled out the white envelope, ripped it open, and counted the bills. $85 still there, every single cent. She had not spent a dime at Vespre because they asked her to leave before the main course. They comped the appetizer. The cash was untouched. She shoved the envelope back in the drawer and pushed it shut. She sat bathed in the yellow glow of the stove hood. Through the thin wall came the sound of Zuri breathing steady and permanent in a night that felt utterly broken. She did not cry. She just sat. The heavy stillness of someone who did everything right, only to find out it was not enough. The next morning arrived the way mornings always do when you work those kinds of jobs, harshly. The alarm at 5:15. The 3-minute shower because the hot water in Building 4 drained fast. If you were not out by 5:20, you finished freezing. The coffee she gave up buying. The lunch she stopped packing. The walk down Dorchester Road to catch the number 10 bus back into town. The same route in reverse from the Charleston that works back to the one that plays. She hit Benny's by 6 o'clock, apron tied, knife out, chopping onions for prep. The blade rocked through the skins in steady, measured strokes. Not fast, not flashy, just relentless. The rhythm of someone who has chopped 10,000 onions already, whose hands just know the work. She navigated the tiny kitchen by pure touch, sliding past the other cook blind, grabbing the salt without a glance, stirring a heavy pot left-handed while flipping a pancake with her right. Not from some profound culinary talent, but from sheer survival. Her muscles had memorized the room's exact geometry the way a weary musician knows a song they have played every single day for 3 years. At 6:15, the front door opened. An older woman walked in alone, took a stool at the counter, ordered black coffee and a biscuit, did not even glance at the menu. She drank her coffee slowly, her eyes locked on the pass-through window, that tight rectangular slot where the plates came out. She just watched Shanice work, studied her hands, traced the movement of her knife. She noted how Shanice pivoted in the cramped space, dodging an elbow without breaking stride, snagging a whisk while holding a spatula, moving with the unconscious efficiency of a body hammered by routine into something almost like grace. Not culinary school polish, just years. Endless years in the same miserable kitchen, repeating motions until they ceased being work and became instinct. Geneva Hart was 67. She had run kitchens for 35 years. She knew perfectly well what trained talent looked like. She knew raw instinct, too. She knew the gap between them. But what she saw through that window was neither. It was something entirely raw. A relationship with food born far from any cookbook. A life where cooking was never an elective, where feeding folks was a daily, desperate act to hold the world together. Shanice finished her shift at 2 o'clock. She pushed through the doors, wiping her hands on her apron. She spotted the woman at the counter, the same woman who had been anchored there for 8 hours, nursing coffees, reading the paper, watching the pass-through like a hawk. Geneva looked up and asked how long she had worked there. 3 years, Shanice told her. Geneva asked who taught her to cook. Shanice just stared. Nobody. She just watched and figured it out. Geneva reached into her jacket and slid a small white card across the counter. Crisp black text. Second table culinary mentorship. Free program for working adults. 3 evenings a week, all skill levels welcome. Geneva brought up the evening program entirely free if she was interested. Shanice stared at the card, did not touch it. She looked at the stranger and asked who she was. Geneva replied, "I am the woman who sat at table 7 last night." The air in the diner turned brittle. Nothing loud, but Shanice shifted her weight. Her posture tightened the way you do when the floorboards suddenly give way beneath your feet. Shanice offered zero response. Geneva told her this was not a pity visit. She came because she saw something real. Then she stood up, tossed a $5 bill down for the coffee, and walked out without looking back. The card sat untouched. 3 days drifted by. Shanice never called. Instead, that card sat pinned to her apartment fridge by a butterfly magnet Zuri bought at a yard sale. Every single morning, reaching for the cereal, Shanice saw the crisp white paper. Every morning, she ignored it. Geneva Hart had grown up out on John's Island, just past Charleston. Her mother, Laureen, spent 22 years as a cafeteria cook. 400 meals a day. $6.50 an hour. Standing over massive industrial stoves in a closet-sized kitchen, she fed other people's kids 5 days a week for over 2 decades. When she finally retired, the district just hired a replacement. No ceremony, no brass plaque. Absolute silence. A woman dedicated 22 years to feeding 400 children lunch, and then she just stopped, and the earth kept spinning like she never even existed. Geneva watched her mother cook every morning before the bus came, a 5-year-old on a step stool stirring whatever Laureen placed nearby. Long before she knew the vocabulary, Geneva understood food was a dialect. For some folks, a hot meal was the only way they could say, "I see you, and you matter to me," because the actual words were just too heavy or too hard to find. Geneva launched her first restaurant at 32, then a second, then a third, all in Charleston, all built from nothing. She lost everything in the 2008 crash. The recession swallowed all 3 spots. She rebuilt once much smaller, ran it for 6 solid years before closing the doors herself. Not from failure. She just finally realized her truest talent was not running a busy kitchen. It was teaching someone else how to run one. The best meal she ever made was someone else's future. She launched Second Table 4 years ago, completely free, open to anyone over 18 willing to show up 3 nights a week. 0 tuition, 0 essays, just a kitchen, a teacher, and an open door. Day 4. Shanice grabbed the card, flipped it. A phone number in blue ink. She held it, dialed. A short conversation. Shanice asked if classes ran during the day. Geneva said no. 7 to 9:30 p.m., Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Shanice swallowed. I have a 7-year-old daughter. Geneva answered, We provide free childcare. A long pause. The kind of silence that holds massive weight. A woman paralyzed in her Friday morning kitchen, gripping a card in one hand, the phone in the other. A shift looming in 4 hours. An envelope with $85 hidden behind the tin foil. A life drifting on autopilot for 6 long years, without once asking where she actually wanted to go. Shanice finally asked why Geneva was doing this. Because 40 years ago someone opened a door for me, Geneva told her. Everything I have started the second I stepped through. Shanice went dead quiet. Then she said okay. 1 word. But inside it was 2 months of saving, an envelope of $85, a pristine napkin on a 7-year-old's lap, a restaurant demanding they leave, a meeting street bench covered in taco wrappers, a kitchen table at midnight, a young child asking her mother if they did something wrong. Shanice walked into that very first class on a warm Tuesday evening in late May. She brought Zuri, who went to the childcare room without a single complaint, mostly because crayons and a new friend were already waiting at the table. Shanice tied on an unfamiliar apron. This was not Benny's kitchen. She stood at her station, gripping a cutting board and a knife, just waiting. Geneva took the front of the room. 12 students, all adults, all working hard. A bus driver from West Ashley, a home health aide from James Island, a man stocking warehouse shelves on Rivers Avenue who just wanted something different, and a woman who cooked for her family of 7 for 20 years without anyone ever telling her she was actually good at it. Geneva skipped the grand speech. No formal welcome, no promises about how this program would magically change their lives. Instead, she said, the culinary industry insists you need a degree to belong in a professional kitchen. A degree costing somewhere between $35,000 and $60,000 for a 2-year run. Make $12 an hour, and that equals 6 to 8 years of your entire income before taxes. They claim you need connections and a name that a real kitchen door only opens from the inside. She paused, studied the room. She told them 76% of head chefs at fine dining spots in this country are men. Less than 7% of executive chef roles at top-rated spots belong to women. For women of color, that number is so tiny it barely registers in the data. Then she laid out the reality. 34 million people here live with food insecurity. And here is the part nobody ever talks about. The folks cooking the meals that wealthy people eat are very often the exact same people who cannot afford to feed their own families. The line cook firing your $40 plate of salmon is skipping their own lunch because it is not in the budget. She explained that programs like this exist simply because the system was never built for you. Careers through culinary arts. Hot Bread Kitchen in New York. Workforce development at community colleges across the country. Food fight. Second Table. We are all doing the exact same thing. We are building a door where one never existed before. She glanced toward Shanice, not specifically, no real signal or nod. She just looked at the room the way you look at a group of people who showed up despite having every reason to stay home. She told them the only thing you actually need to belong in a kitchen is an understanding of what food means to a hungry person. If you understand that you already hold the most important tool a chef can carry, everything else I can teach you. Week 1 was knife work, julienne, brunoise, chiffonade. Geneva stood at the front demonstrating each cut slowly, then again at full speed. Then she looked up and said, "Now you." 12 students. 12 cutting boards, 12 knives moving at 12 entirely different speeds. Shanice was the slowest. Her hands moved with the careful deliberation of a person who spent 3 years chopping onions at Benny's but had never once been told her work had an actual name or a standard for how thin those strips should be. Slower than the bus driver from West Ashley. Slower than the warehouse worker. Far slower than the woman who fed 7 people for years without a single compliment. But her cuts were perfectly even. Every single one. Not fast, not flashy, just even. It was the kind of evenness that comes from hands conditioned to pay deep attention to whatever they hold, simply because they never had the luxury of being careless with anything. Geneva noticed. During that first class, she walked past Shanice's station, studied her cutting board, and did not say a single word. She just moved on. Week 3 brought sauce beurre blanc, butter white wine, shallots. It is a technique requiring real patience, precise temperature control, and the willingness to fail and start over. Shanice failed 4 times in a row. The butter broke. The emulsion separated completely. She dumped it out and started over. It broke again. She just stood at that stove, hands pressed flat on the counter, jaw locked tight. It was the heavy frustration of a person unused to being bad at things. Someone who spent her whole life making absolutely sure she was at least competent enough to survive. Geneva walked over and peered into the pot. She told her if you expect to be perfect the very first time you try a thing, you pick the wrong industry. Shanice met her eyes. "The sauce does not care how many times you fail," Geneva said. "It only cares whether you come back to the stove." Shanice came back to the stove. The 5th time, the emulsion held perfectly. But the 2nd month nearly ended everything. Zuri got sick. A nasty fever started on a Wednesday night and climbed to 103 by Thursday morning. Shanice stayed home. She called in sick to Benny's. She called the cleaning company, told them she could not make it. Sitting beside Zuri's bed with a damp cloth and a bottle of children's ibuprofen, she stayed awake for 31 hours straight. By Friday, she called Geneva. She explained she could not come in. Her daughter was sick, and she was so sorry. Geneva just asked if she was okay. Shanice said she would be, she just needed her mom right now. "Then be there," Geneva told her. A brief pause. "The door is still open," she added. "It does not close just because you stumbled." So Shanice missed a week. Then she missed a 2nd week. Zuri was on the mend, but the cleaning company had given her shifts away. Shanice had to scrape together extra hours at Benny's just to cover the brutal gap. No time, 0 money. The strict math of her life simply left no room for something that did not pay. On the 15th day, Miss Thelma knocked on the door. Standing there in the hallway, housecoat and slippers on, she looked Shanice dead in the eye. "Baby girl is fine," she told her. "She is on my couch, eating crackers and watching cartoons, and she is fine. Go." Shanice tried to protest. "Miss Thelma, I cannot ask you to." "You are not asking," Miss Thelma fired back. "I am telling. Go. Do not let anything stop you." Shanice went back. She walked into the kitchen 20 minutes late on a Tuesday night. She quietly took her station, and nobody asked where she had been. Everyone in that room carried their own version of the exact same story. The bus driver missed a week when his transmission blew. The home health aide lost 2 days because a client's family randomly flipped her schedule without asking. The warehouse worker almost quit after his manager called cooking school a total waste of time for a guy his age. They had all nearly hit a wall and stopped. Yet they were all still here. At 9:15 that night, the rest of the class scrubbed their stations and headed home. Shanice stayed behind. She was practicing her plating. A single piece of grilled chicken on a stark white plate, a dark drizzle of reduction curving across the rim, and a sprig of thyme set at the exact angle Geneva demonstrated earlier. Next door, Zuri was fast asleep on a childcare room chair. Through the glass window dividing the kitchen from the hallway, Shanice watched her daughter. Zuri was curled on her side, a crayon still loosely gripped in her hand, a half-finished coloring page resting on the table beside her. Shanice looked at her little girl, then back to the plate. She placed the thyme, her fingers shaking just a bit, not from fear, and definitely not the cold. It was the deeply unfamiliar sensation of doing a thing that was not for rent groceries, the electric bill, bus fare, Zuri's school supplies, or Miss Thelma's $40. This was just for her. For the first time in 6 years, her hands were building something entirely separate from the brutal business of surviving. They were building something that belonged only to her. She placed the final sprig, stepped back. The plate sat perfectly on the stainless steel counter, glowing under the harsh fluorescent lights of a donated kitchen tucked away in a converted church basement in downtown Charleston. It was far from perfect. The sauce leaned a little heavy on the left side. The chicken probably could have shifted half an inch to the right. But it was hers. She made it from scratch, and it was the most beautiful plate of food she had ever seen. Then came month 4. Something shifted. Nothing dramatic, no single cinematic turning point. It was the slow buildup of 100 tiny things moving in the right direction. Just like a river shapes a stone, never through sheer force, but steady persistence. Shanice stopped following recipes word for word. She started tasting as she went, adjusting, throwing in something entirely off the page simply because her gut knew it belonged in the pan. She seasoned completely by memory. The deep aroma of her mother's kitchen on Dorchester Road when she was a little girl. That exact scent of onions hitting hot oil at the perfect temperature. The rich sauce her grandmother used to make. Rochelle never cracked open a cookbook in her life. She cooked entirely by feel. By the weight of coarse salt between her fingertips. By the shade of a broth that had finally simmered long enough. By the very sound oil makes when it is perfectly ready, and the dead silence it holds when it is not. Geneva saw all of this. In month 5, Geneva stood quietly behind Shanice one evening, watching her adjust a reduction without measuring a single thing. Shanice tasted the sauce, dropped in a tiny pinch of something, tasted it again, gave herself a nod, and just moved on. "Where did you learn that?" Geneva asked. "Learn what?" Shanice replied. "To trust your own hands more than the printed recipe." Shanice looked back at her. "My grandmother," she said. "She never measured anything in her whole life. She just knew." Geneva held her gaze. "Technique I can easily teach," she explained. "But what you have, that instinct rooted in every meal you remember and every meal you went without, I cannot teach that. That belongs to you." By month 7, they had a conversation neither of them would ever forget. It was late. The other students had already cleared out. Shanice and Geneva were quietly scrubbing down the kitchen together, exactly like they had started doing after every Tuesday night class. Not because anyone asked them to. There was just something about wiping down counters and stacking pots in complete silence, side by side. It opened the door for conversations that never would have happened sitting across a table. Geneva spoke up. "My mother fed 400 children a day for 22 years, $6.50 an hour. When she retired, the school hired somebody else, and nobody ever said her name again. Not at the school, not at the district office, nowhere. She fed an entire generation of children on that island, and then she just vanished." Geneva wrung the cloth out under the running faucet. She explained that she opened a restaurant to put her mother's name on the wall. She lost it. She opened another one, and she lost that too. Opened a third one and closed it myself. She took a breath. Then she looked at her student. "But I teach you, and if you cook the way she cooked, with that exact same thing in your hands, then her name stays alive. It just lives in a different kitchen now." Shanice let that sit in silence for a long moment. She folded her towel, set it down on the counter. She said her grandmother Rochelle made oxtail stew every single Sunday for everyone on the block. She never charged. She never counted. She just cooked. People showed up, and she fed them. Geneva watched her. Shanice said she died when she was 14. Nobody on that block makes oxtail stew on Sundays anymore. Geneva nodded. Then you know exactly what I mean. For her final culinary project in month 8, every student had to present a restaurant concept. Not a business plan, not a menu, a philosophy. What kind of food for who and why? Most students pitched the usual ideas: a soul food joint, a trendy brunch spot, a specialty food truck. Shanice brought something entirely different to the table. She described a working kitchen that flat out refused to throw food away. Not one single plate scraped into the trash. Every leftover, every vegetable trim, every surplus portion would be redirected. It would be cooked into community meals, served free once a week to families who could not afford the dining room, but deserved the exact same quality of food as the people who could. She called it a closed circle. The restaurant feeds its customers. The customers fund the kitchen. The kitchen feeds the surrounding community. Nothing wasted, nothing lost. She pointed out that 80 million tons of food are tossed in this country every year, while 34 million people go hungry. The food is already there. It just ends up in the wrong place. Geneva stood at the back of the room. She did not correct a single detail. She added no notes. She suggested 0 revisions. For the very first time in 12 culinary classes, she simply listened to a student finish and said absolutely nothing. Coming from a woman who had spent 35 years in kitchens and held an opinion on everything inside them, that silence meant more than any praise. Meanwhile, as Shanice learned to cook in a church basement 3 nights a week, 7 blocks south on King Street, Vespre was crumbling. It started with the head chef. His name was Martin Caldwell. He had been running the kitchen at Vespre for 2.5 years. Then he walked out on a Wednesday in September, with just 1 week of notice. The official reason he gave was another opportunity. The real reason was that he made $62,000 a year in a kitchen, pulling in $1.4 million in annual revenue. He had been begging for a raise for 8 months. Every time management said the budget was too tight. Yet that same budget allowed fresh flowers on every table twice a week at $18 an arrangement. It also allowed a brand new sound system back in July, but it could not find a raise for the man cooking every single plate of food that left the kitchen. 2 line cooks followed him out the door that same month. One went to a spot in Mount Pleasant, paying $3 more an hour without the grueling split shifts. The other one just stopped coming. No call, no email. She was 23 years old, working 60-hour weeks for 9 straight months. One morning, she simply woke up and decided she was completely done. The hospitality industry loses people like that every single day, quietly. No exit interviews, no explanations. They just stop showing up. The job took way more than it gave, and eventually the math stopped making sense. That is the harsh reality of the American restaurant business. 60% of new places close within 3 years. The staff turnover rate is the highest of any industry in the country, sitting at roughly 75% a year. The cooks preparing meals for the most beautiful dining rooms in every city are among the lowest paid, most overworked professionals anywhere. Good chefs are not rare because of some talent shortage. They are rare because this industry burns through talented people far faster than it can ever replace them. Vespre saw its Google reviews plummet from 4.6 to 3.9 in just 11 weeks. The complaints were brutal and specific. Inconsistent food, long wait times, a signature dish that used to be incredible now tasted completely different every night, simply because a different person was cooking it. The regulars took their money elsewhere. Weekday dinner reservations thinned out. The Friday wait list that usually filled up by Wednesday morning was suddenly half empty by Thursday night. Donovan Price finally called down from Atlanta. He owned Vespre, but he had not actually stepped inside the place in 4 months. He ran 2 other businesses, a consulting firm and a real estate development company. Vespre was just a vanity project he bragged about at dinner parties, then ignored the rest of the week. He called Victoria. He snapped that the online reviews were an absolute disaster, demanding to know what was happening. Victoria told him they lost the head chef and 2 line cooks. She had been running the kitchen with temps, and it was collapsing. Donovan told her to just find someone. He refused to pay King Street rent just to read 3-star Google reviews. Victoria shot back that she was trying. She had already interviewed 4 candidates. One demanded $90,000. Another had 6 months of prep experience. 2 backed out the second they saw the grueling hours. Donovan just told her to try harder, then hung up the phone. Victoria sat alone at the bar after that call. It was 11 at night. The restaurant was dead empty. Chairs were stacked on some tables, but not others, mainly because the closing crew had been slashed from 3 to 2, and they rarely finished the job anymore. Candle holders still sat there, caked with melted wax from the dinner service. A careless water ring stained the bar top, where someone had abandoned a glass without a coaster. She looked around the space, the exact same room she had managed for 4 years. The velvet chairs, the polished hardwood floors, the soft lighting designed to make everything feel incredibly expensive and deliberate. But tonight, for the very first time, the illusion was gone. She just saw 17 tables, most of them sitting completely empty by 8:30. She saw a miserable kitchen that could not keep a head chef. She saw a building looking gorgeous on the outside while completely rotting on the inside. That is how things fall apart when the people actually doing the labor are not paid enough to stick around. Then a memory surfaced, something she had not thought about in months. A Tuesday night, a woman and a little girl sitting at table 14, an envelope holding exactly $85, a confused kid asking her mother if they had done something wrong. Victoria did not know why that moment came back to her. She had filed it away just like every other difficult customer interaction, locked it in that dark corner of her mind where uncomfortable things go to die. But tonight, sitting alone in a restaurant that was quietly bleeding out, it returned. Not the woman's face, not the child's small voice, just the envelope. That stark white envelope resting on the table, and the heavy realization that every single dollar inside it was real. It was a Tuesday night, month 10 of the program. The rest of the class had gone home. Shanice was cleaning her prep station just like she always did, slow and thorough, wiping the counters down in long, even strokes, drying her chef knives and placing them in the canvas roll. Same exact order every time. Geneva was standing over by the sink, arms crossed tight. She had a look on her face that Shanice had never seen before. Not quite stern, definitely not warm, just careful. She told Shanice to sit down for a minute. The young cook looked up, hesitating, then set her towel on the metal counter. She took the stool at the far end of the prep table. Geneva stayed on her feet. She stood across from her student, the stainless steel counter dividing them. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, highlighting the heavy, exhausted quiet of a kitchen that had just finished a brutal shift. Geneva spoke softly. "There is something I need to tell you, and honestly, I should have said it a long time ago." Shanice just waited. She did not press. Over 10 months, she had learned that Geneva shared things when she was ready, and not 1 second sooner. Pushing never worked. Patience did. Geneva looked down. She said, "The restaurant where you were turned away. Vespre. I know the owner." His name is Donovan Price. His mother, Claudette, was my closest friend for 30 years before she died 6 years ago. Before she passed, I actually helped Donovan open that place. I guided the menu. I advised on the entire kitchen layout. I even helped him hire his first head chef. She paused. "I stepped away 3 years in," she admitted. His vision for the restaurant drifted in a direction I just could not stomach. He wanted elite exclusivity. I wanted accessibility. We did not even fight about it. I simply walked away. But I have known about Vespre since before it ever had a name on the door. The culinary kitchen fell dead quiet. The industrial fridge hummed softly behind them. A faucet dripped once, twice, then stopped. Shanice stared at Geneva. She did not move a muscle. She was mentally replaying the last 10 months all over again. Every conversation, every lesson, every evening spent in this kitchen, she was rereading it all under a completely different light. Kind of like reading a letter once you realized the sender knew something you did not. She asked if Geneva had brought her into the program just for that restaurant. Geneva said no. She answered without hesitation, not even blinking. Geneva explained she brought her in because of what she witnessed that night. The way Shanice stood, the way she held her daughter's hand, the exact way she walked out of that dining room without bending her spine a single degree. That is what she saw, and that is exactly why she showed up at Benny's the very next morning. Knowing Donovan is just a second truth, she said, but both truths are entirely real. The fact that they exist at the exact same time does not make either one any less honest. Shanice stayed quiet for a long while, stared down at the counter, looked right at her hands. The exact same hands that were chopping onions at Benny's just a year ago. The hands that had ruined a sauce beurre blanc 4 times in a row. The ones that carefully placed a sprig of thyme on a plate at 9:15 at night while her daughter slept in the next room over. Shanice finally asked if that restaurant was looking for a chef. Geneva told her she did not know, but if they were, she would not recommend Shanice just because she needed a job. She would recommend her because she was actually good enough for that kitchen. Shanice looked right back, said she was not good enough, yet. Geneva told her she would be in 2 more months. Something shifted between them in that silence. Not forgiveness, there was nothing to forgive. Not trust restored, since the trust had never actually been broken. Just absolute clarity. That very particular clarity that arrives when someone chooses honesty over comfort, and the person receiving it fully recognizes the cost of that choice. Shanice picked up her towel, quietly finished wiping down her station. She did not say anything else. Neither did Geneva. Some conversations end not because every little thing has been said, but because whatever got said was simply enough, and both people know it. 2 months later, the phone call actually came. Donovan Price dialed Geneva from Atlanta early on a Friday morning. He told her he desperately needed help. His kitchen was completely falling apart, and he could not find a chef. Geneva told him she had someone. Donovan asked who. Geneva called her the single person she trusted most in a kitchen right now. Donovan asked about her experience. 12 months of formal training, Geneva said. 3 years in a working kitchen before that. Plus a lifetime of understanding what food actually means. Heavy pause on the line. Donovan pushed back he needed someone who could run a fine dining kitchen on King Street, not some student. Geneva reminded him of a question his mother once asked her. What is the most important quality in a chef? Geneva had told her it was definitely not technique. It was never about credentials. It was the rare ability to make a person feel entirely seen through a plate of food. This woman has that. She has had it far longer than she has had anything else. Donovan stayed quiet for a moment. Then he told her to send Shanice in on Monday. By 7 in the morning on a late May Monday, Shanice stood right in front of Vespre. The restaurant was locked up tight. Chairs inside were stacked high on the tables. Front windows caught the early sunlight bouncing off King Street, the glass looking pitch dark behind it. She stared at the main entrance, the exact same door she had walked through 1 year ago with $85 in a white envelope holding tight to her daughter's hand. The very same door she had walked out of with her spine perfectly straight, her heart completely shattered, and a 7-year-old girl asking if they had done something wrong. But she did not use the front door today. She turned left, walked down the narrow alley running along the side of the building, right past the dumpsters, the grease trap, and a leaning stack of empty produce boxes. She finally reached the back entrance. A heavy gray-painted steel door, the kind with no handle on the outside because it is strictly meant to be opened from within. She gave it a firm knock. A guy in an apron pulled it open. He just looked at her. "Shanice Odom," she told him. "I am the new head chef." He quickly stepped aside. She walked in, and the smell hit her instantly. Stainless steel, burning gas, industrial dish soap. That sharp, lingering underneath scent of a commercial kitchen that has been running for years. A smell that completely sinks into the walls, the floors, the ventilation ducts, and never really leaves. She knew that exact smell. She had lived entirely inside it for 3 years over at Benny's, woken up with it tangled in her hair, gone to sleep with it clinging to her clothes. Not once had she thought of it as anything other than pure work. Now she stood, breathing it in, and it meant something completely different. A young line cook glanced up from the prep station. He asked if he could help her. She introduced herself as Shanice, the woman running this kitchen starting today. Then she slipped on the chef coat. Crisp white, perfectly clean. The very first one she had ever worn, with her own name on it. Something Geneva had quietly arranged. The name was stitched in dark thread right over the left side of the chest. Shanice Odom. She traced her fingers over the letters one quick time, exactly the way you touch something you have been waiting forever for, just to make absolutely sure it is real. Then she stood at the main stove. This was the same kitchen she had never been allowed to see from the dining room side. 1 year ago, she had been sitting at table 14, the worst table in the entire house. Back then, the kitchen behind the pass-through window was just a solid wall of noise, steam, and intense light she was not even supposed to look at. Now she was actually standing inside it. Her hands shook a little, not from fear, definitely not from the cold. They shook from the sheer distance between where she was 12 months ago and where she stood right now. From the heavy weight of all those mornings at 5:15, the evenings at 9:30. Every single onion, every broken sauce, all those plates arranged in a church basement while her daughters slept nearby. All of it tightly compressed into the reality of standing right here, inside this kitchen, wearing this coat. She picked up a knife, and she began. No recipe to follow, she cooked purely from memory, chasing the smell of her grandmother Rochelle's kitchen on a Sunday afternoon, feeling the familiar weight of salt between her fingers. The exact way Rochelle taught her long before she had the words to explain why it mattered. The 400 meals a day that Lorraine Hart cooked inside a Johns Island school cafeteria for 22 years without anyone ever remembering her name. The taste of a $3 taco eaten alone on a meeting street bench the night everything finally broke. She cooked, drawing from all of it, every single meal she remembered, every meal she had been forced to go without, every plate of food that ever meant something far more than just eating. The first finished dish left the pass-through window at 6:45 that evening. Out in the dining room, Victoria was quietly adjusting a table setting up near the front. She did not see it. She did not know yet. Dinner service started. Tickets came in. Shanice calmly called them out. The kitchen moved, but not with the frantic crashing movement of a crew in trouble. It was something else, something tighter, warmer, far more precise. The line cooks noticed the shift within the first hour. The new chef did not yell. She spoke in a steady, even voice that carried across the room without ever rising above the hiss of the stove. She said, "Please." She said, "Thank you." She called out behind you whenever she passed. She listened when someone confirmed an order and told them to take their time and do it right if a cook tried rushing a plate. They had never actually heard those words from a head chef in this kitchen. Not once in the 2.5 years most of them had worked here. By 9:45, the final ticket went out. The kitchen began to shut down. Line cooks wiped their stations clean. The dishwasher ran the very last load. Shanice stood at the pass-through window checking every single plate before it left. She caught 2 that were not quite right and quietly fixed them herself without saying a single word to the cook who made them. She would talk to him tomorrow. Tonight was definitely not the night for harsh correction. Tonight was simply for the kitchen to finally feel what working under real respect was like. Victoria pushed through the kitchen doors at 10:15. She came back to check the closing procedures exactly the way she did every single night. holding a clipboard in one hand, wearing the same dark blazer, the same tightly pulled back hair, that identical rigid posture that always made her look slightly taller than she actually was. She stepped through the doorway and immediately saw the woman standing at the center station, wiping down a stainless steel counter with a clean cloth. Victoria froze. The recognition did not hit her all at once. It arrived in slow layers. First, the face, something deeply familiar. A face she could not immediately place. Then the eyes. Dark, unblinking, perfectly level. The very same eyes she had stared down into a year ago at table 14 when she delivered those specific words. Then the rest of the memory rushed in. The white envelope, the little girl, the ruined birthday dinner. The exact polite poison she had used, telling her this might not be the most suitable setting for her family tonight. Victoria just stood there in the doorway, bridging the kitchen and the dining room. The exact spot she occupied 1 year ago when she asked a mother and her young daughter to leave the restaurant. She started to speak, saying, "You are," but she never finished the sentence. She really did not need to. Shanice looked right at her, slowly set the cloth down on the metal counter. "I'm the head chef of this restaurant," she told her, and that was all. She did not ask if Victoria remembered her. She did not point out that she had been kicked out. There was no demand for an apology, no fiery confrontation, no dramatic speech you might expect from someone who spent a whole year dreaming of this exact moment. Because she had not spent a year imagining this moment. She had spent a year learning how to cook. The simple fact that she was standing here was not about revenge. It was not even about justice. It was simply what happened when a woman who was told she did not belong in a room decided to walk right back into it through a completely different door. She grabbed the rag, went back to wiping down her station. Victoria lingered in the doorway, perfectly still, absolutely silent. She just stood there, caught in that tight space separating the kitchen from the dining room. It was the border between the two realities that had always defined this restaurant. The world doing the serving and the world being served. And for the very first time in 4 years of anchoring that exact spot, she had no idea which side she actually belonged to. She stared down at her hands. Her mind drifted back to that night, not about Shanice, about the child, that little girl in a dress stitched from 2 old ones, sitting at the table with her napkin resting perfectly on her lap, hands folded just right. And the question, the heavy question that had followed Victoria home, sitting in a dark corner of her mind for 12 months, a package she could not throw away, yet absolutely could not open. "Mama, did we do something wrong?" She remembered those words. She always had. They echoed every single night she closed up the fine dining room, alone, walked out to her car and sat silently in her apartment. Convincing herself she was simply doing her job. It haunted her right now, lingering in the doorway, staring at the woman wearing a chef coat with her name stitched over her heart. Victoria turned away. She walked back into the dining room without a single word. Shanice stayed silent too. The kitchen was completely quiet. The stoves shut off. Overhead lights hummed, and somewhere inside that heavy silence between 2 women with nothing left to say, something fundamentally shifted. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic. Just that quiet shift you feel when the solid ground you stood on for years turns out to be entirely different from what you believed. Geneva walked into Vespre's on a Thursday evening, exactly 3 weeks after Shanice took over as head chef. She kept her visit a secret. Approaching the host stand, a young woman she did not recognize offered a warm smile and asked about a reservation. Geneva replied, "Table 7, the name is Geneva Hott." The hostess checked the screen and led the way. Table 7. The exact same table. That same chair by the window facing King Street, catching the same sharp angle of evening light spilling through the glass in long gold rectangles across the white linen. Geneva sat down, rested the napkin on her lap. She studied the space. Identical room. Same velvet chairs, familiar hardwood floors, perfectly soft lighting. And yet the atmosphere felt completely different. She could not quite pinpoint why. Maybe the fluid way the waitstaff moved, or perhaps it was the steady sound bleeding through the kitchen pass-through window. Gone was the frantic, panicked clatter of a restaurant buckling under pressure. This was far steadier, a natural rhythm. Glancing through the window, she spotted Shanice, crisp white coat hands flying, calling out tickets in a calm voice that never once needed to shout to command the room. 12 months ago, Geneva sat in this very chair, watching a mother and daughter get thrown out. She had dropped her fork that night and never picked it back up. Tonight, she occupied the same seat, watching that exact same woman command the culinary line. The food arrived: roasted beet salad, grilled chicken glazed in a rich reduction sauce, finished with a fresh sprig of thyme resting perfectly on the rim. Geneva studied the plate, picked up her fork, took one small bite. Her eyes drifted shut. The flavor went way beyond correct. It was not simply well-seasoned, properly timed, or perfectly balanced. This was something else entirely, something much deeper. That rare quality of food prepared by someone who knows a meal is never just a meal. It is absolute proof someone thought of you. Proof someone stood over a hot stove and decided your basic hunger mattered enough to actually do something beautiful about it. Geneva knew that feeling well. She tasted it in her mother's cafeteria on John's Island and inside her own restaurants before losing them all. It defined the rarest, most incredible meals she experienced across 35 years in the hospitality industry. You cannot teach it. It is not a technique. It is carried only by a person who has been both starving and fed someone, who grasps the agonizing difference not as an abstract concept, but as a physical memory living inside their hands. She gently set the fork down, just sat there, breathing. 2 years ago, doctors had diagnosed her with a serious heart condition, a secret she kept hidden from everyone. Not her culinary students, not Shanice, not even the doctors at the free clinic on Calhoun Street she visited every 3 months to check her declining numbers. She launched Second Table out of pure belief, but she pushed it forward so aggressively because she knew borrowed time was never guaranteed. She took on extra students, ran more classes, burned the midnight oil, and pushed harder. A very specific kind of urgency kicks in when you realize your legacy has to outlive you, and you still have no clue if it will survive. Shanice certainly was not her only student, but Shanice was the one reflecting Geneva's own soul right back at her. That identical stubbornness, the absolute refusal to break. Those steady hands moving through the kitchen, working as if answering a quiet question asked a long, long time ago. Geneva told the waiter she needed a quick word with the chef. Within a minute, Shanice stepped out, sauce staining her apron, hands still radiating heat. She paused right beside table 7, locking eyes with her mentor. Geneva smiled and said her mother would be incredibly proud of this meal. Shanice stared back, replying that Miss Thelma, her neighbor, said those exact words last night over leftovers. Hearing that, Geneva threw her head back and laughed. A genuine, unguarded laugh slipping out before she could even control it. The kind of warmth that floods a dining room, making every single guest feel lucky to witness the moment. Shanice started laughing right along with her, standing proud in a crisp white coat, right inside the very establishment that once told her she did not belong. She just laughed. For one brief second, the kitchen, the dining floor, the pass-through window, and all those difficult years entirely compressed. It all melted down into the joyful sound of 2 women sharing a moment in a space that finally felt exactly as it should. Over the following weeks, Vespres fundamentally changed. Not merely the online reviews climbing back up to 4.5 stars in 2 months. Not just the fully booked reservation book. Something much deeper shifted. A quiet transformation that never shows up on a spreadsheet or a local Google review. The kitchen evolved, the entire culture transformed, changing how the crew actually moved during a rush. Shanice completely rejected the old executive chef's brutal style. She never screamed, she threw 0 pans. Nobody was ever made to feel tiny over a burnt sauce. Instead, she looked everyone in the eye and used their first names, from the exhausted dishwasher all the way to her trusted sous chef. She always said please. She always said thank you. She told them to simply take their time and get the plate right, every single night. And steadily the meals leaving the pass carried a distinct warmth that was entirely missing before. Not some fancy new ingredient, not an experimental technique, just the quiet, undeniable proof of a workplace where human beings actually mattered. She even launched a community initiative. Every week, one prime table remained strictly reserved for a family who could never afford Vespres, yet totally deserved the experience. 0 applications. No embarrassing income checks. Absolutely no questions asked. It was simply a table holding a tiny card on the fresh linen that read, "Welcome. You belong right here." When Donovan heard the news out in Atlanta, he immediately called, complaining about giving away free tables weekly. Shanice shut it down. They were not giving away a damn thing. They were paying off a heavy moral debt this restaurant owed since its grand opening. Donovan went dead silent. Finally, he agreed, and Victoria kept her job. Shanice explicitly asked ownership to let her stay, surprising Donovan. He demanded a reason. Shanice explained it plainly. Firing her is just the easy way out. The actual hard work involves completely changing what she sees when she looks at another human being, so Victoria stayed on board. She never formally apologized out loud, but every single evening before dinner service began, she personally walked over to that reserved table. She would delicately place the small printed card on the linen herself. "Welcome. You belong here," setting it down gently with both hands, nudging the edges until it sat perfectly centered. Then she retreated to her host podium to do her job. Zuri finally visited on a warm Saturday afternoon in June. The 8-year-old wore a brand new dress, nothing stitched from old scraps this time. It was bought from a real King Street boutique, paid for with money Shanice proudly earned running the kitchen that now carried her name. She slid into a corner booth, table 14. That exact same seat by the swinging kitchen door, officially the worst table in the entire building. Zuri had no clue, though. She didn't realize the painful history it held. The young girl just sat down, cracked open the menu, and ordered dessert. A rich chocolate mousse finished with a delicate gold leaf on top. When the plate arrived, she ate it incredibly slowly with a tiny spoon, smiling that pure, radiant smile a kid gets when the world finally feels exactly right. Shanice watched her baby girl through the pass-through window, standing firmly on the kitchen side, the side she had fought for and earned. She watched Zuri sit happily in the very chair where this whole ordeal began, just eating chocolate and smiling. And that solitary image beautifully answered the heartbreaking question at the core of their struggle, the one a confused 7-year-old asked on a random Tuesday night. "No, baby girl, you didn't do a single thing wrong." Meanwhile, back in that cramped apartment on Dorchester Road in North Charleston, hidden behind aluminum foil in a kitchen drawer, the white envelope remained exactly where Shanice left it. $85 inside, untouched, unspent, just quietly sitting there for a full year. A quiet reminder that everything she built, the sharp knife skills, the complex reduction sauces, the sweaty church basement, that heavy chef coat, and the prestigious King Street kitchen, all sparked from a dinner she was never allowed to eat. Some doors just refuse to open when you push. They only unlock when you circle the building and carve out a completely different way in. Some spaces refuse to welcome you the first time around. They wait until you return with a presence they simply cannot ignore. You see, dignity is not earned by upgrading your wardrobe or padding a bank account. It is something you inherently carry, and those who fail to recognize it, they are merely revealing their own blindness, not measuring your worth. There are meals you eat and immediately forget. Then there are meals that entirely shift how you view the world. The difference is never just the ingredients. While this specific story is fiction, its foundation rests on the lived experiences of real working people. Mothers, fathers, single parents, and night shift workers. People who have stepped into rooms and faced judgment long before uttering a single word. They were measured by their coats rather than their character. But the culinary mentorship programs mentioned here, those are entirely real. Organizations like Careers Through Culinary Arts Program, known as CCAP, and Hot Bread Kitchen in New York, change lives every year. Workforce development programs at community colleges across the country do the exact same thing. They build doors where none existed. If you or someone you know is searching for a way in, please look them up. The door is waiting. I wrote this piece because I believe the most dangerous force in our society is not actually poverty. It is the quiet, unspoken agreement that poor people somehow deserve less respect. The idea that someone in $9 shoes has less right to occupy a space than a person wearing $90 ones. If this story made you slightly uncomfortable, good. Sit with that feeling. If it touched you, challenged you, or shifted how you view the people around you, consider subscribing to the channel. Share this video with someone who really needs to hear it. Because the ultimate truth is this: people may eventually forget your name. People may forget your face. They might completely forget what you owned. But no one forgets the person who treated them with profound dignity when the rest of the world refused. They will always remember who opened a door for them right when every other door was slammed shut. And they will never, ever forget who fed them when they were hungry. Shanice walked back into Le Vespre, but not as a customer. She returned as the person who feeds the room. That changed everything. Was her return a form of justice or something far beyond it? A rare kind of grace that the restaurant truly did not earn, yet so desperately needed. Tell me your thoughts down in the comments. Until next time, stay kind, stay steady. Never believe that what you do for someone else is simply too small to matter.